As I'm going through my presentation, I need to warn you, first of all, that this is really an hour-and-a-half presentation that I'm bringing into 45 minutes, and so I'm going to be talking quickly, but I did consolidate it as well. And I do know that I am definitely more of a cemeterian than a precast concrete person. However, what really remains consistent is taking care of employees and making sure that we are keeping everybody in line with our employment and helping them grow in our organizations, whether it's from our executive team to our plant people and our grounds people. So this theme and this topic that I'm going to be talking about is really important for all of us. And having consistent employer reviews is really important for our company. And I know that it's something that I'm not sure that everybody necessarily looks forward to, but it's something that really has helped our company with consistency and any sort of documentation that we need to. So I'm going to go through just some examples of what you can do, how you can become better at all of this, and why it is really critical for all organizations to have employer reviews. I do like to always start this presentation with understanding a little bit better by show of hands of how many organizations and companies that you're in give consistent employer reviews annually. Let's just say once a year. Raise your hands. Okay. So it's about 50% is what I'm seeing here, and that is very typical of what we're looking for. And I know looking at that percentage here too, people just get caught up in some of the minutia of the everyday tasks. And so there's no real right answer of how to conduct these reviews, but I'm just going to give you some pointers. Hopefully you can walk away with some ways to improve the actual way of doing this then too. So we want to start, first of all, with how critical it is to keep our employees engaged and to keep them very happy and satisfied, but also make sure that they're being held accountable in their positions. Finding employees is a very difficult task. Finding good employees is really challenging as well. And especially right now, I hear this over and over from everybody that I'm talking to, is employment is very challenging. Right now, from our company standpoint, very typical of what a lot of you are seeing, is that we have to hire people at a higher wage than we are accustomed to. And then when we're bringing those people in at a higher wage, we have to give our loyal employees more income. We have to raise them up more. And then all of our products and services, all of the prices are going up tremendously. So obviously we need to raise our prices. And it's only going to be sustainable for so long to be able to keep at this pace. But we're doing our best to make sure that we can stay in line with all of that. But in the bottom line, it's going to affect us all too. So if we can keep good employees for a longer amount of time, that's what our goal is. But we also need to recognize we need to quickly get rid of bad employees. And that's part of what I'm going to be talking about in this presentation is do not hang on to people for too long because it's very costly for everybody and the effect on your good employees is devastating. So when we lose an employee, it costs anywhere between $20,000 to $60,000. And that's from anywhere from losing the momentum of what their tasks are and what their actual performance is, to the hiring process, to the onboarding process, to buying new equipment, to going back and having to resurrect any sort of employment agreements that you've got. And it's very costly to lose an employee no matter what level they're at in your organization. But to keep a bad hire on board is even more costly because that is such a ripple effect with everybody's way of looking at our decisions as a manager. When we tolerate bad attitudes, when we tolerate people that are not able to fulfill what they've been hired to do, everybody else sees it and the performance and their productivity goes down with it. Because they will say, I don't know why I need to work so much harder at this, and I don't know why I need to work so hard, when that person is allowed to get away with giving us a fraction of their effort and talents. So when we look at a bad hire and keeping that person on board, that is more costly than actually losing an employee that we decide to get rid of as well, or that they decide to leave on their own time. Productivity goes down. The time lost to recruit another person is tremendous. And right now, there's headhunters everywhere taking our top talent. So we need to be aware of that also and be ahead of the curve with any sort of talent that we've got and to keep them happy in our organization. Employee morale is definitely negatively impacted by keeping a bad hire on board, and then also on negative impact with our client solutions and client relationships is tremendous. If that person has a bad attitude in the office, you can only imagine what their attitude is like when they're in front of our customers or clients, or if they're in sales, prospects. Those people are going to walk away because there's got to be some sort of positive connection with them. So be aware of that cost of keeping bad employees on board. Finding employees when it comes to recruiting. Again, right now, we are in a very challenging time with finding the right people. And these are just some of the areas that I use personally for recruiting. But the ads, whether it's online or newspapers, I probably should have even taken that off because we can't even do that anymore. If just a generic ad that we have for any position really does not work for us anymore. So you have to be a lot more clever and creative. Job fairs, now that we're getting back in person, I have definitely done a lot of really good hiring from job fairs, but it is a little bit of herding cats. You're going to get a lot of people in front of you in a short amount of time, but the positive side about job fairs is that you can meet them in person. You have first impressions that you're going to hopefully be able to weed yourself through versus a phone interview or just reading a resume or finding out a little bit more online about this person. LinkedIn, for me, has been very positive. I've hired some people just by doing some generic searches in LinkedIn for just the position that we're looking for, saying, let's just say administrative assistant seeking in the search bar of a LinkedIn. And you can find people that generally have this in their title line or in their tag when they're seeking employment. And of course, you can take people and actually take them away from other companies too. So they might actively be working, but it's an area where if you go out for the people seeking employment, it is easier to find them that way too. And really the best way of recruiting, as a lot of us probably do know, is personal recruiting. When you have somebody who is local and they give you good service, whether it's in a restaurant, whether it's at a rental car place, whether it's at the place you pick up your dry cleaning, and you see that you are getting excellent service from them, hire them and give them the chance to get out of that position if they want to. They won't leave if they don't want to, but if you can get anything with good, positive customer service right now in this day and age, do whatever you can to try to bring them on board. And there's a lot of times that people get stuck in their own head and they get stuck in positions and they don't know how to leave. And if we give them that opportunity to be able to come into our organization, it's a great way for them to be able to spread their wings and really grow with that. So finding people in real life is so much better because you really get that real person and that personality there too. So the interviewing process is also a challenging one because we're usually getting the best of everybody. Hopefully they're coming into that interview at their very top performance, at their very top behaviors. So when we're going through the interviewing process, you want to make sure that, first of all, you are talking 20% of the time, asking open-ended questions and letting them answer them and letting them talk 80% of the time. This is the biggest problem that I see with people interviewing is that they think they are selling our company and giving a commercial for our company, and they've already done their research, most likely. They know who we are, they've gone to the website, they've looked on Glassdoor, and they've already known what we're doing here. So what we need to do is really pull out their real personality and try to figure out whether or not they're going to be capable and competent and able to perform the job duties that you are putting on the table. So if you are going to be working with these people, if you can challenge them immediately with something as a task while you're interviewing them, please do so. If it's sales, do some role playing. Give them a little sales task. It's a typical case of sell me this pen. And you want to make sure that you're pushing their limits to see what their actual behaviors are and their abilities right away. We have an architectural firm. There were times where people would come in and they truly didn't know how to use AutoCAD, but they said they were proficient at it. So we did, at one point in time, have to get to the point where it's like, okay, here's this block building, get on AutoCAD, design it for us, show us that you actually have the skill set. How long is this going to take you to conduct this task? But you have to challenge them and you have to make them uncomfortable too, because you don't have time to mess around. And this is going to be the best of the best in the interviewing process. Once you get them on board, it definitely will go down a couple ticks. So just know that you have to make sure that they are shining at that point in time. I always say definitely conduct 2 different interviews as well. So in person with one of our employees, and whether it's another coworker or whether it's another manager, having a separate interview with that person, you're going to see things differently. And it's great to be able to compare notes and see what maybe one person picked up on and the other person did not. So have 2 separate interviews with 2 separate people and compare notes on that. So as we're going through the reviews and the performance evaluations, I want to just be real about some of the personalities that come out with these reviews. So it worked. But that video, obviously mocking this process, but I've seen all of that. I've seen all of that in real person. The tears over absolutely nothing, where you give them a needs improvement and trying to encourage them to be better in a skill set, or the person who just gets so angry and threatens. I remember I had somebody who ended the interview process or the review process that says, "Remember, I know where you live." And so it's just like, okay, are you kidding me? Or the raises, where you feel you're being very generous with a raise and they are expecting something double, or if not more than that. So it's an area where it's very challenging to give a proper, good review process. One of the areas that I've also found for me with the raise part of it is that we do our reviews at the first quarter of the year. We do them by April. And then I hold off until the end of the year to do my increases, my wage increases. That way we understand how the company's performing throughout the year, and we separate that process, because far too often I had people going through the review process that's all they were looking at. That's all they were focused on, is how much money they were going to be getting as an increase. So I really wanted to make sure that they're focused on what they need to improve on, what their strengths are, and how they're doing a really good job for our company and where we need to improve on. So talking about the love-hate relationship with performance reviews, really when you're looking about the positives, it does keep everybody on the same page. We're forcing communication where we're not always the best communicators, even though sometimes we think we are. But it formalizes the process to help people understand what our expectations are versus their expectations versus their performance. So it makes sure that we have some sort of track record of what's happening with their career in case something does go south. If there is somebody who we have to terminate, these help us with keeping some sort of a track record of saying, we've been trying to get you to improve in this area for the last 3 years, and we've seen 0 effort from you to try to improve in that area. And if you can have that written documentation, if an employment termination goes sour, it really helps with your case. If you have nothing on file, you're going to have a very challenging time, especially when it comes to any sort of discrimination suits that you might have in front of your hands. So have this in document format. Unfortunately, the negative side of reviews is that they are too infrequent. Annual reviews are not enough. There's no doubt they're not enough. But they're a lot to get together. It's a lot to put together the time and the energy to put this on paper, to run it past your management, to sit down with employees. So you should have frequent checkpoints, whether it's quarterly sessions where there's something else in writing, or what I do in our organization, and I started doing this a few years ago, our weekly one-on-ones, where I have an Excel sheet of what everybody's working on, what they're working through, and that's really helped too with performance and just keeping track of what's happening. So they're too infrequent if it's only annually done. It does discourage ongoing communication, unfortunately. I hear this way too often to this day, is that if we have an issue with one of our employees and we have reviews coming up, that manager will just say, I will wait until that review to be able to address this issue. And that is not the right approach to it, but I continue to hear it. I just heard it again this year with a grounds member that we had a problem with. And they did not want to address it because his review was coming up. They may as well wait until that happens. And it's really a poor technique to follow that. Performance reviews, unfortunately, can also be subjective. If you have some personality conflicts, unfortunately, that manager does get to control what's happening with the review itself, and you have to make sure that your forms or your format is in a way that it is objective, and there's some way that you can actually have a couple sets of eyes looking at it. It can be a power play. There's no doubt about it if you've got a personality conflict. And again, just mentioning, dreaded by mostly everybody. All employees generally dread it. Managers generally dread it because it's something that you have to have uncomfortable conversations about certain items. And when somebody is performing well, that's great, but no matter what, you should have something in there that needs improvement and that you should continue to push them out of their comfort zone for their next year's goals and objectives. So going through just the general types of employee reviews, the very common one is a top-down review, where your immediate supervisor, your immediate manager gives you this review and really looks at a way that you can sit down for an hour of time, whatever the case may be, and have that formal conversation. It reinforces expectations and goals. It makes sure that they understand what you're looking for, what they're looking for, and it sets a tone for what their role is. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, they can be subjective, and there definitely can be an ego involved with all of that too. And sometimes we are rating more of an attitude versus performance. However, please remember that if there is attitude issues with your employees, you definitely can fire them because of that. But you have to make sure that you're tracking it, and it's very difficult to monitor. So don't think that their performance is the only thing that you can fire somebody for. If their attitude is out of check, you can definitely terminate for that reason. Another type of performance review is 360. This only works if you have a larger organization, but this is really where you're getting feedback from both coworkers, management, sometimes clients, sometimes other people that are in the industry, and it's usually a very formalized process where you're getting feedback from everybody involved. Usually you get more unique perspectives from everybody, and it really can be an opportunity to make a difference with somebody's work ethic and the way they want to be viewed in the field as well as in the whole workplace rather than just from their managers. Unfortunately, the negative side of this is that the contacts that we hire might be busy or unqualified. They're not the right people. We have vendors, we have suppliers that we're buddies with. We might give that name as giving the 360 feedback, and that's not real feedback because you have your buddy that you're giving a good positive feedback from. Employees actually might fear giving true feedback if there's something negative. I know retaliation isn't supposed to be a thing in the workplace, but it is, and there is an area where people can hold grudges, and we don't want that to happen. So we have to be aware that employees might not be totally honest with 360 feedbacks. And perceptions due to the relationship, and it won't work in smaller organizations. Self-assessment reviews, these are also common where you give the employee the form, they fill it out, you come back, you talk about it, and you can see what their perception is of their type of quality of work versus your type of quality of work that you see from them too. It makes employees feel like they're part of the process rather than just being dictated to of here's what we're going to talk about. So they actually have some control over the feedback that they're going to be talking about and giving, and it makes them think about how they are as performance in the companies. It forces them to reflect on their position, and it sets the positive tone for what they want to be talking about their accomplishments throughout the year. Unfortunately, generally, low performers rate themselves much higher than they are really performing, and high performers are generally more modest, and they will rate themselves lower. I do not know the psychology behind all of that, but I think low performers are just trying to hang on. They're trying to make themselves look like they're much better workers than they actually are. But the differing perceptions of the employees' feedback versus the managers, unfortunately, can also be the crux of that entire conversation. And it isn't something then that we're looking at the points of view, we're looking at the differing perceptions more than anything, and that can get in the way of a positive review. Peer-to-peer, coworker to coworker, this is really going to be an area you don't see this very often. Trust is very critical in these types of situations, and teammates need to be able to take criticism and bounce back and still have a relationship in the office if somebody gave them some negative feedback. So it doesn't always work in the way that it's supposed to just because people have personalities. And we know that personalities are also one of the bigger things that we are managing in the workplace versus performance. It can definitely get in the way, so we have to be aware of that. People can become defensive. They can put themselves in a situation where they say, no, that's not exactly how this went. So just be careful with the peer-to-peer evaluations. I'm not going to focus on this too much just because this is difficult to see, but this is our company's performance review. And just as a quick summary of all of it, we've simplified this over the years just because it was really complex for a while. And we have 4 different rating systems. Number 4 is exceeds expectations. Number 3 is meets standards. And number 3 is our baseline. If they're doing their job, they're doing their tasks, they're doing what we hired them to be, that's what we're starting with. And you do exceeds expectations for their strengths. And then where we need improvement is for something that we're going to continuously work with them on. And then the 4th range is a 0, where this is unacceptable performance. And anytime there is a 0 on our review, the manager has to be very, very clear with that person. Your job is in jeopardy if this doesn't change quickly. So this isn't a fluff factor here. We're not just trying to make everybody feel good. And if this person's job is at risk, you need to make sure that they understand it's at risk by giving them those zeros and explaining what that means. Another one that I got years ago when I did this presentation, which I thought was a great review, is, again, there's 2 categories here. You can't see it, but it's employee and supervisor. So they're giving a self-assessment as well as a top-down assessment. And it's going to be an area where there's some things in this review that I think are phenomenal that we just really don't address normally. But ethics. How do you measure ethics? Do you ever talk about ethics unless something dramatically goes wrong? This is something on their review that they are actually rating that employee for. Are you an ethical person? And it's just such a vague term and concept that we don't address it enough. But I thought it was great to point out some of these different areas. Attitude is on here, initiative. We always want to talk about those items, but if they're not formally on here, we sometimes forget about it. On the right column, again, that you can't see, this is coming from a grounds crew perspective. There are very specific skill sets about, can you run a backhoe? Are you able to use a weed whacker? It's very basic, but we don't address it unless it's a disaster usually. And if it's something that's going to be critical enough that they'll lose their job over, we need to address it in the review. And then also points allow objectivity. If you can add up the points, that's an area where you can get rid of that subjectivity that you're going to have, and you can rate it year after year. So the next year, you're going to see what they're comparing to versus the prior year, or even against other employees. Don't use names. I use percentages. So once I add up the points schedule that I have, and I haven't done this past year or two, but what we have is that if that employee is in the top 20% of our employees' base of numbers, we want to make sure that they understand that, make them feel good about it, because they don't know how they rank in comparison to other people. But we also want to make sure we point out the bottom side of it, is that if this employee is in the bottom 20% of our company in terms of performance, they need to know that. They need to understand that we are going to be working closely with them to turn that around, or there might not be a position for them anymore. So don't be afraid to let them know where they fall in ranks with other people, and that does usually make them feel really good about themselves, or they understand the severity of what they need to do to improve. I have some pointers on preparing for the evaluation, both from personal experience as well as research, but this is something that we've done in terms of our formal process. And for employers, definitely want to formalize the process. So Zach works with me. He knows the process. I send out an email that says, here's the dates that you need to have the first draft back to us. Here's the dates that I will have it back to you. Here's the dates that the reviews need to be completed by. And then we make sure that every employee has a plugged-in time, that they are removed from the regular setting, and that we have them in front of us. So there's no distractions whatsoever. But everybody understands when this is happening rather than just springing it on them, because then they can prepare, they can have things ready to go too. And then what they're preparing for is a good idea to review your job description, to say, boy, I forgot I was actually supposed to be doing this. Maybe I need to review this and ask about how I can continuously get additional help from my employer. Definitely be able to toot your own horn. Have a list of accomplishments and suggestions for how to improve, and show that you're actively engaged with the process of reviews. This goes such a long way when you're sitting down and asking for the feedback and making sure that they have feedback to give to you as well. And also make sure that you're very open with your manager about what you need from them. This is an area where a lot of managers don't ask for it. They forget to say, okay, what can I do for you? What do you need from me? And it's an area where be prepared to say, I really need X, Y, Z from you, and this is what I would like to see from that happening. Managers appreciate it, mostly. Most managers do. So just make sure that as employees, you're ready to go and offering suggestions for improvement and for feedback. And have some goals set for the next year. Have some list of accomplishments that shows that you want to do something more than what's just at your desk every day. It doesn't need to be big. It can just be small tasks that shows that you're continuously learning, you're continuously growing, you want to contribute to the overall growth of the organization, and I can guarantee your manager is going to be supportive of how to get you there. So be ready to have some suggestions and goals for the next year too. How to conduct the actual evaluation is, again, schedule an appointment. I highly recommend you don't do these on a Friday. Unfortunately, whether it's a positive review or a negative review, a Friday gives the people the weekend to think about it. And they might be perceiving that this went more poorly than it actually did. But by the time they have the weekend and they unwind a little bit and they vent to their spouse and they go home and complain about it, they may get themselves so worked up that by Monday they come back into the office and they're going to come flying into your office and say, okay, let's talk about that review that we had. And they're going to have all sorts of negative feedback for you, and you don't need that to happen. So I always just say, don't do this on Friday. If they're going to be upset about it, wait until the next day to do it, but don't give them the weekend. Eliminate interruptions, making sure that there are no surprises. I think this is an area where it's really critical as a manager. But I don't want anybody to say, I had no idea that you thought that of my performance or about me as a person. Or if we are in a termination situation where they said, I had no idea this was coming. There should never be surprises, and the review process allows you to spell it out very clearly in terms of definitive timelines. If their job is in jeopardy, how long do they have to turn that around, and what do you need from them to be able to complete that? It can be spelled out, it can be very black and white, it can be bullet pointed, but you have to make sure it's measurable and that they clearly understand what you're saying, that their job is in jeopardy if they don't complete these tasks. Make comments consistent with your rankings. If you're ranking them high, make sure your comments reflect some positive things that they've done. If you're ranking them low, give specific examples of why you're ranking them in that category and how they can do better with all of that. Be honest, be fair, be consistent. Consistency for me as an employer is really important, especially when it comes to HR issues and things that are in writing. Even though I might like this person better personally, I'm not going to give them special favors and things that the other employees don't have, because that is going to come back to haunt you. So fairness and consistency is very important. Be confident in the process. I have lots of examples of where my managers are not comfortable with this entire process, especially when it's an uncomfortable conversation. One example in particular is with a very loyal employee who I've had for many years, and he's a very wonderful man. He is nice to everybody. Everybody loves him. But when he has to address things on these reviews, you can see his confidence just go down the tank. He gets real nervous about it. He will literally change the review ratings in the actual meeting. You saw that on that video where the guy kept crossing it out and giving her a higher ranking because she was crying. And I've seen that happen where they can almost talk him into the fact of, I don't agree with you on this ranking, and he's changed it in the middle of the process. Don't do that. Know that you have to be very solid going into this. Of course, get their feedback. You can write some notes from that feedback, but you will look like a very weak manager if you're doing that in the process. So make sure that that doesn't happen and support the process. Don't just say, my manager's making me do this, let's just get this done very quickly. You have to support why we're doing this and explain the process to that employee. When we're receiving feedback, we want to make sure that we are very actively listening, staying focused, no cell phones, no nothing. Don't have distractions. I can't reiterate that enough. But listen to the entire process before reacting to what they're saying to you. Make sure you're understanding what they're saying before you're asking questions. Taking notes and having open, honest feedback and body language is very, very clear as well. You don't want to sit in the chair with your arms crossed and just very curmudgeoned face. You saw that in the video too, and believe me, I've seen that all happen. Seek specific examples and trends, what you're actually seeing with their behaviors, making sure you don't become defensive if you're hearing something that you weren't expecting or that you didn't want to hear, and make sure that you're accepting praise graciously. Say please, say thank you, make sure that there's some sort of appreciation for what is happening here, and the opposite applies for the employers as well. You gotta make sure that you're being gracious to each other. Establishing a fair rating system. Also want to make sure that there is understood with what's happening here. I mentioned on our reviews that we've got the 4 rankings. I briefly explained to that. I used to have typical increases, wage increases that tied to these, but I took those off because that's all over the board now. There's no way to follow that. But I do want to just reiterate that if your reviews are coordinating with any sort of raises, if you have people that are overall coming in as below average or unsatisfactory work, they do not deserve a raise. Do not think that that you automatically should be putting in some sort of a 3% cost of living raise in there. That being said, you can say to them they can achieve it in a certain amount of time, 60 days, 90 days, whatever the case may be, if they do this. So it's a carrot for them to say that they can perform it. But if you're giving them raises and they're not performing the jobs, they are just going to lose so much respect for the whole system itself. And you're rewarding them for not doing what you hired them to do. So be very cautious of that. Obviously, meeting job expectations, they're doing their job, they should be getting some sort of an increase to continue to let them know that you appreciate them. And exceptional work just means that they're going well over and above, and do what you can for your employees that you want to keep on task with all of that too. Our company does a lot with incentives, performance reviews, incentives as bonus reviews, incentives as well, so that there's a specific dollar amount that's coming with achieving a task. Salaries and increases can get us caught if we are not having a great year. I hate to say that. We've been in situations, we've been in years where it's kind of a little scary to say, I have to make sure I'm paying everybody, and if I get my salaries too high, that can be concerning. But if we're doing well and they're doing well, I love to pay out bonus checks to say, you accomplish this check, here's going to be, or this task, here's a bonus check for you for achieving that. And that way you're not tied into it as an employer if times get tough. Any sort of reviews, using reviews for liability, I always want to do a little bit of a disclaimer to be very cautious as well for any sort of discrimination situations that might come about. This is obviously becoming more and more prevalent in our recent years here, but you have to be aware of the protected categories in any employment situation. So age, sex, race, religion, national origin, disability, sexual orientation, those are protected groups that you cannot use in this review and hold them in any sort of way, shape, or form against them. So be aware of that, especially if you are in a position where you need to terminate somebody. You have to have this in writing and show why they're being terminated, because if they're in these protected classes, they can come back and get you very quickly. So putting things in writing can help you tremendously. Protected actions that you can't hold them against are jury duty, union employment, workers' comp, military duty, and retaliation. So if there's going to be any of these situations that are coming about, you have to protect these employees from these services that they're performing here too. And again, I'll reiterate, you can hire and fire for attitude. You just have to make sure you're documenting that you've addressed this with them as well. So that's all I've got this morning. There was a lot of information in here. If anybody wants a copy of our company's review forms, I've got it for grounds, I've got it for admin, I've got it for sales. Happy to share it. Just either email me or drop off a business card, and I'm happy to go over this in more detail at any point in time then too. Reviews are really critical for everybody, and especially having that documentation in place too. So thank you, appreciate your time. Have a great meeting.